And we're back. Time now to bring in the positive Professor Carol Sikora. Earlier today, Sky, ITV and the newspaper were all showing news articles wrongly stating that hospitals were seeing 14 times more COVID patients than this time last year. They followed this quote by the Chief Executive of NHS England.
We have had 14 times the number of people in hospital with COVID than we saw this time last year.
Now, that quote by Amanda Pritchard is wrong. The news articles were wrong. There are around 4,000 fewer COVID patients in hospital than this time last year, not more, certainly not 14 times more. The stories were fake news and have since been removed. But what's going on? Let me bring in Carol Sikora now, because Carol, it feels to me like the mainstream media, the broadcast media in particular, are obsessed with this narrative. They can't get away from this narrative of COVID cases and hospitalizations soaring. And the facts on the ground simply don't back that up.
You know, it's propaganda we're getting. It's reminiscent of the Stalin era in Russia. And what Amanda's done is fall into a trap. The people around us said, look, we've got to get more people get the booster. What can we do? We've got to get a shocking statistic out. So they came up with this. The fact is, and now she's backtracked, of course, what she was comparing was August data compared with August data last year, which is totally
Ridiculous.
different. And then
We're in November.
We don't have any more recent data. We have data on her own website from the 5th of November, 4 days ago. So clearly wrong, clearly an embarrassment. But what she was trying to do, I'd like to think in good faith, was persuade people to have the booster, and this was the best way she could do it. Even the pictures were fake. Those ambulances were not this year's ambulance. They were last year's ambulances, queuing to get in. There haven't been pictures like that. Having said all that, Dan, there is a bit of blame shifting here. Every year since I've been a medical student, that was many, many years ago, winter pressure come at about this time, you know. Ambulances pitch up, elderly people, chest infection, not necessarily COVID, all sorts of stuff, flu, pneumonia and so on. And then coupled to this is the care home crisis. So the number of care home beds are falling and the number of people working in care homes is dropping. So there's nowhere for them to go after they've had antibiotics and oxygen in hospital. So the hospitals are getting clogged up. So she's right. Winter pressures this year will be worse, not due to COVID, but due to the fact we've got chronic lack of capacity that you don't have in Western Europe.
Understand that, and thank you so much for explaining the truth about the situation. Now let's talk about cases, Carol, because I've been off air for 2 weeks, and it has been so disturbing for me to see the rest of the media be determined to stick with this incorrect narrative that cases in the UK are soaring. Carol, they're not. They're plummeting. So where are the Robert Pestons of this world to correct the facts?
I just don't know. Both Sky and BBC are perhaps the two worst. I looked on Sky the other day, and it was presented 30,000 on Saturday, new cases. Now, 30,000 is a lot better than a week ago when it was 40,000. It's dropping. Instead of saying that, it was a shock horror. The cases are going up. It's now 30,000 a day. And most of these cases are just mild infections. They're not serious in any way, not hospitalization, certainly not deaths. Things are getting better. I can't see the motivation. I don't think it particularly sells newspapers or television channels to keep reporting this sort of exaggeration of where COVID is taking us.
What annoys me so much, Carol, is if the cases had still been rising, you just know there would have been this growing drumbeat for the government to introduce further curbs on our liberties. And I feel it's just so dishonest that they're now talking about the fact that cases are dropping. And we need to understand why they're dropping.
Exactly. And they're dropping because the predictive models, you remember the imperial models, the curves, the actuals are far below even the most optimistic prediction. It's far below it. And it's coming to an end. It's going to drop much more precipitously over the next 3 weeks. Even according to the models, we're through the worst of it now. It's true, and maybe Pritchard was making that point, winter is coming, and that will lead to a whole load of other factors in there.
Well, I'm sorry, Carol, I'm not giving Amanda Pritchard the benefit of the doubt. She's actually on my watch list now because she is the chief executive of NHS England. This is a woman who we should trust. And if she is going to spout to the British public facts that are provably untrue, to try and make us even more scared about COVID when the population has already been terrified for the past 20 months. I'm sorry, I am going to call this woman out and I'm going to say something that will be unpopular in certain quarters. Carol, this woman is dangerous. Give us the facts, Amanda Pritchard. Do not give us an irresponsible scare story. I'm not having it and I'm going to call it out on this show.
Quite right. And I think the same goes for Amanda has not got any medical background. She's been a through and through NHS administrator all her career. Very successful, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And
a bureaucrat, typical NHS
the story
bureaucrat.
was written for her by people that had a story to tell. They wrote the conclusion and then made up the facts to go with the conclusion.
Well, I know, but she should check her own facts, Carol. I'm sorry, she should check her own facts. And at the end of the day, she is responsible for what she says to the British public, just like I'm responsible for the facts and the figures that I put out on this show. So Amanda Pritchard, you've made a very bad start, in my opinion. Let's have some truth from you. Let's have some honesty from you and stop trying to scare us. It's not going to work this time. Maybe it worked last winter. It's not going to work anymore in a country that is over 80% double vaccinated. Carol Sikora, the positive professor. Keep on coming back to us with all of that good news, Carol. We'll speak again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for coming up.